It has been obvious for a while that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is in fact accelerating his way to power, to full power and to kingship. So several steps were made before. He removed several key persons in the Saudi system a few months ago. And now the last string of arrestation, which is in fact enormous by Saudi standards and by all standards, is really in fact aiming at almost decapitating all the rival branches within the royal family. Of course, the pretext that is given to this arrestation, to these arrestations, is a struggle against corruption or a fight against corruption, with the idea that all or almost all of these personalities were involved in heavy monetary and financial embezzlements, of laundering money abroad, and etc., which is a quite laughable pretext in a country like Saudi Arabia, where a lot of things are done in a kind of shady way. But I think that one of the main arrestations, one of the main figures arrested and put aside, is probably the most important one and has nothing to do with the corruption thing. It's Prince Met'ab bin Abdullah, who is in fact the son of the late King Abdullah, but mainly the head of the National Guard, which is more or less the last bastion standing in front of Mohammed bin Salman's ambition, because the National Guard is a very powerful armed body, almost 80,000 people, very well trained, and that was one of the last remnants, the last remaining bastions of resistance to the rise of Mohammed bin Salman. So the removal of Met'ab bin Abdullah, plus the removal of other senior princes and a big part of the business community in Saudi Arabia, is in fact a way of dismantling the last strings of resistance to the rise of the Crown Prince. The risks that are involved in such a move are structural, because contrary to what many people could think, Saudi Arabia is not a country of absolute monarchy, and it's not an authoritarian, totalitarian system. It's a system where power is concentrated, but it is concentrated in a very wide ring within the royal family, what we call the club of the senior princes. We are talking about some 5,000 people who are in fact the party of Saudi Arabia. And the power is built in a very horizontal way, cooptative way, with spoils distributed to the branches of the family in order to build consensus and build legitimacy. Breaking this system, which is what Mohammed bin Salman is doing, entails a big risk of concentrating power, of eroding legitimacy, and of narrowing the base of support of the king. And the system is maybe deriving or slipping bit by bit towards a kind of concentrated, centralized, maybe authoritarian system that is not at all resemblant to the DNA of the kingdom. So this is a new adventure. Some people are saying the risk is well calculated by the Crown Prince. I would be more skeptical. I think that the risk of seeing the branches of the family that are today curtailed coalescing in the future and trying to take the revenge is quite big. And this is, I think, what Mohammed bin Salman has probably in mind. I think that now the writing is on the wall. Yes, I think that this is what happened this weekend. I mean, this ring of arrestations is probably, if not the last, but maybe before the last step of seeing bin Salman becoming king. I think that the king has now all the reasons to say we are now preparing a new phase. The kingdom has to be led by someone young and energetic. The challenges are enormous, both internally and externally, because we have to remember that what's happening is happening in the wake of a very adventurous, let's say, project of Saudi Arabia in the region, Jordan, in Yemen, against Iran, maybe in Lebanon, and etc. So the leadership could say that now it's time to pass to a new phase, a new period where we need a young and energetic leadership. And I very well see the king abdicating maybe at the end of the year and passing the baton to a crown prince who is today, in fact, the de facto king of Saudi Arabia. It's difficult to tie it directly to at least to the ring of arrestations. What is obvious is that it is tied to the anti-Iranian upscaling in Saudi Arabia. All of a sudden, Saad al-Hariri, who was in fact sitting in a national unity government with Hezbollah in Lebanon, who was in fact having tense but normal relations with Iran. He received the Iranian velayati a day before the resignation. All of a sudden was in fact summoned, or he traveled to Saudi Arabia and read a very inflammatory communique of resignation where he designates Iran as a malevolent force, vowing to cut the hand of Iran in Lebanon, and really depicting Hezbollah as also a malevolent force in Lebanon, which it is probably, but in fact, Saad Hariri forgets to say that he was in a government with this force for the last year. So I think that the resignation is more tied to the anti-Iranian designs in Saudi Arabia. If this is the case, this bodes quite badly for Lebanon, because it means that Saudi Arabia has really taken the decision to go to a confrontation with Iran over Lebanon on the Lebanese theater, which was so far neutralized. The questions that are attached to that hypothesis are enormous. What are the tools and means and resources of Saudi Arabia in such a venture? What will be the retaliation of Hezbollah in the coming months and weeks? And what is the scope of that confrontation? Is it a political confrontation only, financial confrontation, Saudis maybe withdrawing their deposits from Lebanon, or will it take a military turn with the organization of some paramilitary forces that would take or try to take on Hezbollah like in 2008 or before? If that is the case, I think that Lebanon is really spiraling towards very bad days and very gloomy days. If not, if the resignation is tied purely to domestic Saudi affairs, I think that it will end up here. It will mean also that the political future of Saad Hariri personally is more or less in shambles. In the immediate, I think that we are heading towards a long governmental crisis in Lebanon, with a period of vacuum that is all too familiar in Lebanon, that resembles what we have lived 2 years ago, without a president, without a government for months. As long as it is not really clarified if this is an anti-Iranian Saudi gesture or a more limited gesture, what happened lately, I think that no Sunni personality in Lebanon with consequent way or legitimacy or following in the Sunni street would dare to, let's say, go against the tide and accept a nomination. Once this cloud is settled, once this question is settled, probably the constitutional mechanism will take over. The President of the Republic will make the consultations that lead to the nomination of a new government. I think it will take time, but I don't see it evolving towards a dramatic, let's say, scenario, unless Saudi Arabia is really keen in going very forward and very rapidly in the confrontation with Iran. At that moment, the question of the government could become, unfortunately, meaningless, and we will be talking of other more urgent and more acute things like, for example, security threats in the country. As we said before, I mean, if you agree that the Saudi system is built on a very consensual basis among the princes and the branches of the family, you could rapidly say that yes. Now, I know that the counter argument is that Mohammed bin Salman is in fact the last chance of reform of the royal system and of its survival. But you know, sometimes some attempts at heavy-handed reforms can lead to backlashes and to counterproductive effects. I think that my bet, I mean, my interpretation is that he is maybe not overreaching, but maybe overreading the signs of some support that is coming from Washington and elsewhere. I don't think this will immunize him against the structural way the Saudi system is constructed that could easily boomerang at one point against him.